Greetings, Pastor. My name is Dave Hodgson, and I'm the CEO and the owner of the Paladin Group of companies, which is headquartered in Queensland, Australia. We are a diverse group of companies. We're about 32 companies and trusts, and we're valued in excess of 1.2 billion Aussie dollars. I'm also the founder and the leader of a marketplace ministry called Kingdom Investors, or KI. And I'm guessing the reason you are watching this video right now is because one of your business people has asked for a KI chapter in your church. So I think the best way to describe the, shall we say, the benefits of having KI in your church is to give you perhaps a short history of how and why KI was formed and what has become of it, and how we can be of assistance in terms of getting your business people to fund not only the expenses of the church but also the vision of your church, and then to help them to come under you as, or to recognize you as their senior spiritual authority, so that they don't meddle in the affairs of the church and try and manipulate the pastor or manipulate the leadership with their offerings and so on, as so often happens. We come across it a lot, okay? I'll give you the history of KI just to put it into perspective for you. In 2004, my pastor asked me to form a business ministry because I was probably the only guy funding our church on any significant level. So this is a church called City Edge Church in Caloundra in Queensland, Australia. And the pastor said to me, Dave, I want you to train up the entrepreneurs in this church to do what you are doing because you're going to die one day. That's what he said. And then who's going to fund the church? And that's fair enough. So I asked him if I could change the model of how church business ministries run, because in my mind, in Australia, the local church business ministries were not successful. The model didn't work. So typically the model was, let's get together once every 3 months for a breakfast. It was usually on a Friday morning. It was usually a gathering in some restaurant where you had a inspirational speaker, and the speaker would come on and inspire the business people for 20 minutes or half an hour or so. There'd be a bit of networking. They're sitting there clock watching because they've got to get to work, and then they'd all take off to work, and within a few hours the inspiration is gone, and there was no commitment to change or to fund the church or to understand the benefits of having a strong spiritual covering from the church, or change the culture in the marketplace, or engage the social distress issues the church might be working with. Nothing like that at all. It was just to inspire them. So I knew that didn't work, and being a busy guy running a big corporation, I asked if I could change the model. And Pastor Dan said to me, you can do whatever you like. You're the business person. You just train the entrepreneurs. So I changed the model so that we would meet on a Thursday night instead of on a Friday morning. And I checked that carefully because the church, and this was only, for me to work with our local church. It wasn't supposed to spread around the world. God did that. We didn't try that. But at the end of the day, I wanted Thursday night simply because Wednesday night was home groups, Tuesday night was prayer meetings, and so on. So the church had people busy most nights, and Thursday night was the best night for business people. So I invited them all. I figured that in our church of about 400, I think it was in those days, there was about 10%, maybe 1%, of the true entrepreneurs, and maybe about 5% of the semi-entrepreneurs, if you like. So really all I wanted to do was find between 4 and 10 people who had the extra capacity to create lots of wealth to fund the church on a meaningful scale and fund the vision of the church, not just the expenses, because the expenses were pretty much getting covered by tithes, but the vision was going nowhere because the vision was required lots of money, millions. So what I did is I invited the whole church to come because I wanted to try and find the right people. So I invited all of them, and I gave them a very fancy meal. We had a 5-star chef in our church, and I said, please put on a nice meal, sit-down meal for everybody. I paid, and I want them all to come and just enjoy the night. It's free. I'm not charging them. And then I'm going to lure them in with a very fancy guest speaker, and the guest speaker is going to be somebody practical, like a fancy lawyer, Christian lawyer, who's going to teach them how to set up trusts, or a eBay expert, or a branding expert, somebody they would pay a lot of money for if they went to listen to them out in the world. So I was going to pay that person as well. But in between the meal and the fancy speaker, I took half an hour to teach them what I had learnt in the marketplace at the front line of kingdom business. By that time, our business was around about $150 million company. So it was much bigger than any other business in the church, but it was still relatively small to what it is today. So I had a captive audience, and I could teach them from a different genre of ministry to what they'd been taught before. It wasn't just inspiration. It was a case of, let's teach them what practically works in the marketplace in terms of Christian applied economics or biblical economics, what works. And I had tested the principles over and over again, the biblical principles, to see that they worked. And when I was confident they worked, I could apply them. Then I had a proof of concept, and I could teach out of that proof of concept. Okay, and this has led to us being world leaders today, lecturing at universities, lecturing to governments all over the world, secular universities, economic summits, all sorts of things like that on applied biblical economics, simply because we proved it and were able to teach out of it. Okay, but back to the early days. It was because of the teaching in the middle that I managed to attract the entrepreneurs. And I decided to do this every single month. And my mindset was, month after month, less and less people would come because they're not going to be interested. It's only the entrepreneurs that are ultimately going to be left behind. And that's exactly what happened. Over the months, the rest of the church stopped coming, which was great, got cheaper and cheaper for me to pay for. But ultimately, I ended up with my group of about 10 or 12 really, really interested people who now I could train up to fund our church. And over the years, I trained them up to fund our church, and our church has been exceptionally prosperous ever since, literally, okay? When we have our miracle offering every year, it is fully funded, and I'm on the board of the church, so I can see what funds come in. I know who's putting the funds in, and I look at those entrepreneurs that I trained, and those are the ones that are bringing in the bulk. And some years, we've actually doubled the target of the financial offering, and the doubling comes from 5 or 6 of those strong entrepreneurs who had nothing at the beginning. Okay, literally they were kids. Some of them were kids in 2004. Literally, they're in the youth group. Okay, and now they're wealthy and they're funding hundreds of thousands and so on. Okay, but the thing that changed or that took us by surprise back in the early days was that as we narrowed this down, all the other business people around in churches around in the city came to me and said, "Oh, can we come? We need to learn this stuff as well." So I asked my pastor, I said, "Dan, what are we going to do with all these business people that want to come?" And he said, "If Jesus is Lord in their church, they can come, you can pay." I said, "Yeah, okay, thanks, Dan." Anyway, we let them come. And their pastors would find out, are we sheep stealing or not? And obviously we weren't. We want new converts. We don't want church hoppers. It's the wrong demographic for us. But either way, they all came because business people, they love to cross-pollinate. They don't focus only on local church. Business is universal. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So if your business ministry, if it's a small church like we were, and even as we are today, our church is too small to have its own little business ministry. It's incestuous almost. They will still want to cross-pollinate with other business people from other churches. Anyway, these people all came, and they came in their hundreds, and they came from the entire continent of Australia, from the north to south, the islands to the south, everywhere, until it overflowed the church. And so I said to my pastor, "What are we going to do now?" And there was a pastor on the Gold Coast about 250 kilometres away, and she came to me. She said, "We come up here every month with a busload of people. It's traffic each way, rah, rah, rah. Why don't you come down there and start another chapter?" That wasn't the objective. It wasn't what I wanted. I'm an ex-military guy. I was in the Special Forces in the SAS, and I don't like public speaking. I don't like being the center of attention. But God was growing this thing. So I said to my pastor, "Hey, Dan, what do you want me to do with this?" And he said, "Well, Pastor Suzette is the gatherer. You go there and you can start a new chapter there." So I said, "Okay, Pastor, he's the boss in my mind. He's the general." So off I went, and we started a chapter there. And then one started in Perth, and then one in Melbourne, and then one in Newcastle. And all over Australia, these chapters started up. And I was traveling to them every Thursday night to go and lecture, and then we had to take them on different nights. And then it started up in different countries around the world, in the United States, in Europe, and Southeast Asia. And definitely that wasn't my goal. Okay, I'm still trying to run a big corporation. I'm growing my company to fund the church as the church gets bigger. During that time, the Lord not renewed, but enhanced my assignment from not only funding my local church, but to create the world's first modern day sheep nation. Okay, Matthew 25, sheep and goat nations, but a nation that has eliminated largely its social distress and human misery and replaced it with universal prosperity and human flourishing. So what that would look like in the modern era is what the Lord showed me, and that is the assignment. To do that, we needed massive influence and a lot of cash, a lot of affluence in the marketplace and with government, with public policy and so on. And so we grew KI all around the world with that one big overarching goal. But along the way, that involved the business people strengthening their spiritual covering. Okay, so I'll come on to spiritual covering now, because this is what we found as we were cruising along. When all those other people started coming, I started looking at my audiences, and I started to notice that about half of them didn't go to church anymore. They'd actually left the local church. They were still Christians, still trying to be good people in the marketplace, still, funding a little bit of charity and stuff like that here and there. But they weren't going to a local church. And I noticed that they weren't doing as well as the people who did go to a local church. So I began in about 2006 to start polling the audiences to see who had a local church and who didn't, and how well they were doing in the marketplace. And over the years, we realized very quickly that those who did not go to church did not do anywhere near as well in the marketplace as those who did actually attend a local church. And we put this down to a lack of spiritual covering. So spiritual covering is naturally afforded by a local church just simply by your attendance there. There is more to it, obviously. And Pastor, if you get time, please go onto our membership site. Just use the login details of the business person that you're dealing with, and watch our series on spiritual covering, because I know that it's helped a lot of pastors. A lot of pastors email me and say, wow, I never knew, and now we can deal with these business people properly. But the point is, we realized when I spoke to these people who don't go to a local church, I said to them, why? What's happened? Why don't you go to church? And usually there was all sorts of weird reasons. Oh, I'm carrying hurts from this church, or the pastor didn't greet me at the door after I made a big offering, or he didn't invite me to dinner. All kinds of nonsense, really not reasonable reasons to leave a church. There were all kinds of reasons. But I sat them down and said, well, look here. The whole issue is, I was in the special forces, and I learnt about the covering that we had from our headquarters and so on when we went into special operations. And without that, we wouldn't have survived. And it's no difference in the spirit world. If you look at all these people who go to local churches, they are prospering in the marketplace. I would never go in the marketplace without a covering. I would be too scared to do that. I want my pastor and I want my church leadership. If it's a big church, pastor's too busy. I want the church leadership. I want the intercessors to be praying for me in the marketplace. It's kind of like going into battle without an air force. You need that covering. And so I want you to go back to church. I want you to make sure that you get a spiritual covering from a local church. I want you to be the lowest maintenance Christian in the church, so no hassling the pastor. You treat the pastor as the senior spiritual authority. You default to him or her. Doesn't matter who it is, doesn't matter how old they are. You are low maintenance, no meddling, no trying to manipulate. You use your gift to create a strong spiritual covering. So by using your gift, I'm saying your gift of finance. You notice that the singers, people with good voices and got the rhythm, they go and they're happy to sing for their church for free. And the people with leadership are happy to go and run the youth group for free. And the people who can do knitting, happy to knit blankets for the poor for free. But the business people, they don't want to fund, they want to use their gift for free for some reason. So I teach them spiritual covering is useless if it's not strong. If your pastor is fretting about how they're going to keep the doors open next week, how can they be praying for you? They haven't got time because they're worrying about money. You fix that problem. You do that, and the Lord will apply His favor, and you will multiply big time, just like we have, just like we learned. Okay? So we did that, and we found that there was immediate improvements, not only from the business people, suddenly things starting to come together, suddenly the intercessors are sending them prophetic reports and all sorts of stuff, but also back in the church was starting to get cash flow coming in from business people who had never tithed, who only just arrived recently, who don't care if the pastor doesn't greet them and give them a big hug. They're just there to get the spiritual covering and know that in return they will make it strong, and the church will be strong, and they will be protected in the marketplace. And then as that settles in and beds in, they start forming a different relationship with the people in the church, because they're coming in more now to serve serve rather than to dominate. And we find that they settle in at a whole different paradigm of what church is all about. Okay? So this has worked all over the world, Pastor. So what I would like to do now is play you a short little video clip from a very prominent pastor in the United States who runs a very large church. Okay, it's probably not very large by US standards. It's 10,000 plus, I would say. This church recently moved into a new building, and it's a beautiful building in Miami in Florida. And they've kitted it all out, decked it out, fitted it out. Thousands of people can fit into the auditorium. I think 3,000 can fit into the auditorium now. And they could not have done that without the business people of the church. Now, I started doing KI at that church 3 years ago. It's 2020 now. I started going there in about 2017. And at that stage, those business people, you know, it's a Hispanic church, Spanish speaking mostly, but they're all fluent in English. It's the United States. But they were mostly subsistence type thinkers and just growing their own businesses. I taught them to think about their local church, about the spiritual covering, to grow this, about their community, how to trade God's way in the community, and then about their nation. Okay, so how to think nationally in terms of how to, you know, think about the toxic public policy that might be in their city that needs to be dealt with, and so on. Well, you know, last year in 2019, the Vice President of the United States invited 120 of those members of KI, my people business people that I trained, to come to the White House and tell them what policies they would like, okay, for the upcoming elections in the United States. And they invited me to come with them to explain the culture and the biblical principles that I had taught these people. So in last year in November, 120 of us plus Pastor Frank Lopez, who's a very, very influential Hispanic leader, we were in the White House at the personal invitation of the Treasurer of the United States, and we had dialogue with her, and we were able to have input and be briefed by them on how they were working and so on. So the point I'm making is that KI training has the ear of governments at the highest level, of the biggest economy in the world, our own government, other governments. We've lectured to mixed governments like the Lebanese government, which is a hard one. Okay, there's Muslim leaders, there's Orthodox Christian leaders, there's all kinds of secular people all in the same government. Okay, we lecture at universities, at economic summits, all over the world, having massive input. All right. So that's the point that I'm making. So please have a little listen. It's just a couple of a minute or two from Pastor Frank, and I'm sure you'll see how he appreciates KI in his church.
Hello everyone, my name is Frank Lopez. I'm the senior pastor of Jesus Worship Center. We're a multicultural church community in Miami, Florida. And we are a Kingdom Investors chapter. Excellent teachings. Dave Hodgson and his wonderful team, they have helped us so much to connect with our business people. We gather once a month. It's extraordinary material, great discipleship. And as a pastor, it helps me a lot how to pastor this community of business people and how to teach them to be influenced and to change the world for Jesus. So I 100% recommend it. Thank you, Dave Hodgson, for all you do. And Pastor, if you really want to learn how to connect with business people, how to pastor them, how to teach them the principles of the word, how to see your community prosper, Kingdom Investor is an excellent source. God bless you.
Okay, so there's an endorsement from Pastor Frank Lopez. Please now meet Senior Pastor Paul Bartolo, who's my own pastor. He's an awesome guy. In terms of the succession planning here, when I said KI started in 2004, I mentioned Pastor Dan. So Pastor Dan retired, and Pastor Paul, who was the youth pastor, became the assistant pastor and then the senior pastor. Now, my son was Pastor Paul's youth pastor, okay? So figure that out. Now Pastor Paul has come up the ranks and he is my senior pastor, even though he's 30 years my junior. I still default to him as the senior spiritual authority. I don't care about his age. He's very wise, he's very well trained, and I default to him. I serve on the board for him. I run the KI ministry, which comes out of our church. Whenever he wants a cup of tea with me or a cup of coffee to say, Dave, how's it going at Paladin, my company, or how's it going at KI? Can we get together? I drop everything. I make sure that I just clear my diary for him. When he wants me to preach in the church, I don't preach, I teach. But whenever he does, I never say, no, I'm too busy, or I'm going to be in the US, I'm going to be here or there. Last year I did 111 lectures around the world, only 18 were in Australia. Still, when my pastor wants me, I drop what I'm doing there, reschedule, and I come and do what he wants done, okay? So the point is, I teach the business people to default to the pastor and the leadership as the senior spiritual authority, okay? So please meet Pastor Paul. What happened here was I interviewed him for our series on spiritual covering because he knows the benefits of supplying a spiritual covering to the business people in terms of return on investment. He's investing in us, we invest back. And he also knows the benefit of the church as a result of the business people funding it. As I said, we've got a very prosperous church. Okay, so he understands how to do that, and that's why I've interviewed him for our spiritual covering series, and I've just cut the last little bit out just so you can have a listen to what he thinks about it.
Well, all I wanted to say is obviously thank you, Dave. It's an honour and privilege to be interviewed for KI, and we love KI. For any marketplace kings, leaders, pastors out there, we just hope and pray that this is such a great resource because our heart is to see the kingdom established here across the globe, and I love what KI is doing, and we look forward to the future.
Good one.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Bless you,
Thanks,
Paul.
Dave.
Cheers, mate.
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay, isn't he awesome? Now, finally, our content, that's KI content, is being studied at any one time by over 360,000 students who are attending over 20,000 campuses around the world. And they have to study it in order to get their bachelor's, okay? And that is via the International School of Ministry, or ISOM as it's called. And ISOM is the largest online Bible college in the world. Okay, so here is a short little clip from Dr. Biren Gilfillan, who's the CEO of ISOM. Incidentally, Biren was the television director for Reinhard Bonnke for many years throughout his career doing crusades and so on, and eventually Biren set up the ISOM as a discipleship to follow on from the crusades, because the crusades had this massive evangelical impact, and as soon as Reinhard left, the place collapsed back into polytheism and so on, and voodoo and everything else that goes on in Africa and around the world. And I come from Africa, so I know what happens. So Biren formed ISOM to follow on and bring in discipleship to make sure that Christianity stuck, make sure it worked. Okay, so please have a little listen to Biren.
Hi folks from Kingdom Investors, Global Marketplace and church leaders. Biren Gilfillan here from the International School of Ministry in California. We're often called the ISOM. We're known for being the world's largest video Bible school. We're in 17,000 training sites. We work in 146 nations and in over 70 of the world's major languages. We distinctly believe that God has placed on our planet people with unusual and extraordinary gifting and understanding. Our goal as a ministry and as a work is to capture strategic messages from those people, to translate them into the languages of the world, and to make them available to people all over the globe. You likely will recognize some of the teachers we already have recorded. They are people like Reinhard Bonnke, Jack Hayford, Joyce Meyer, John Bevere, just to name a few. In October of 2014, I attended a conference that was in Connecticut here in the United States, and I heard just 15 minutes of Dave Hodgson from Australia. As I listened to him, I recognized that this man was carrying something from God as he, in those short minutes that he had, began to unfold his understanding of kingdom assignment, of spiritual covering, of kingdom purposes, and especially of ousting Babylon, the spirit of fear, greed, and corruption from the marketplace. I understood that Dave had something that needed to be exposed to the global church. This set me on an incredible journey, not only to capture 5 of Dave Hodgson's key messages, but to build around him others from around the world that would bring similar revelation or complementary revelation. Already we've been able to capture 72 teaching sessions. They come from 58 different teachers, and they represent 20 different countries around the world. This new material is what we call now the Marketplace module.
Well, there you are, Pastor. I hope that explains the value of KI to your church. It's free, okay, from most aspects. Usually what we do is we actually lecture to over 60 million people a year. But through the membership site, we have chapters, and there are chapters all over the world. The chapter leader is a member of the membership site, paying $20 a month, $20 US a month. But everybody else attends for free. Okay, so if you had a KI chapter in your church, people could come to the church, or it might be in some other building if the church is too small or whatever it might be, and we don't charge. Okay, we just provide all the material and stuff and the system to do it through. And one of your members, usually the host of the KI of the chapter in your church, is going to be paying $20 a month. But that's it. There's nothing else to pay after that. You can still charge, of course, lots of churches. I think there's some in New Zealand and around Australia and so on, where they charge a small entrance fee to cover costs. Some of them hold their meetings in, not entertainment centres, conference centres and places like that. So that comes at a cost, so they just charge the people to attend the monthly meetings or bi-monthly meetings or whatever they might be holding. Okay, but generally we're not there to make money. Throughout the years of KI, it's always been free. We've spent over $45 million running KI, and the membership site generates very little in terms of $20 a month. It's just a commitment fee, if anything else. Okay, so I'm always available if you want to talk to me and ask any questions. Your business person who's introduced you would have my contact details, so please contact me whenever you like to, and I drop anything to talk to pastors because I understand the tough job that they do. Okay, so God bless and hope to meet you one day.